We'll start off our video with a very quick unboxing. So once we open it up, we see our device as well as a quick setup guide. So this just takes you through the Windows updates and the MSI Center. And once we take it out of the bag, there's a small film that we need to take off the screen. And here's the device. Yeah, so this is what it looks like. It looks a lot like the Ally, but we're going to come back to it later. Next, we have our quick guide, and then after that, we've got our charger that comes in two pieces, and that's all that we've got in the box. Now we'll move on to my first pickup. So checking out the device, it feels fairly light, it feels good in the hand, there's a lot of grip at the back, more than I expected. You should be able to hold on to the device without worrying about it falling, and the joysticks, they feel decent, they remind me a lot of the Ally. The face buttons, a lot like the Ally as well. Next, onto the bumpers and triggers. The triggers seem to have a short range of motion and they kind of tap onto the back of the shell. The bumpers are very strange. They feel clicky yet mushy, and you have to click a bit closer to the outside of the device. Then we have our standard buttons. At the top here, we've got our I/O, our power, USB-C, headphone jack, and at the bottom we have nothing. I didn't show it here, but I did test out the D-pad and it feels very tight. Moving on to the back, we have a whole lot of grill. It's pretty much the whole back cover, and we have two rear buttons. Overall, on first pickup, the device does feel pretty comfortable. We'll take a quick look at the specs now. I got the high-end model, which comes with an Intel Ultra 7 155H with 16 gigabytes of LPDDR5 RAM at 6400 megatransfers per second. It has a 7-inch 1080p 120Hz IPS display with VRR. It comes with a 53 watt-hour battery. And we have a 2230 size SSD that's NVMe PCIe Gen 4. We have USB 4, an audio jack, and a micro SD card slot, Hall effect joysticks and triggers, and we have a fingerprint reader integrated into the power button. Now that we've covered the specs, let's see how it compares with some other devices as well as the ROG Ally. Now we'll take a look at the weight of the claw. So we have the claw coming in at 673 grams. My ROG Ally comes in at 682, that's with a custom backplate and a skin on it. And without mods, it's 614 grams. The much larger Legion Go is 863 grams, the Steam Deck OLED is 639, and the One X Fly comes in at 621 grams. And now we'll take a look at the physical size difference. We'll start off with the Ally first. As you can see, the claw is wider and taller, and as a result of that, you can see that the button span is a little bit closer together on the Ally. Taking a look at the back of the Ally, you can see that the grips are fairly flat. The device itself isn't too thick. If you look at the claw though, the grips are quite a bit thicker, and the device itself is just slightly thicker in the middle. Now taking a look at the Legion Go, it is taller and it's also wider, but not by a lot. The screen is quite a bit larger on the Go, and it also has very small bezels when you compare it with the Claw here that has a 7-inch screen versus an 8.8. And lastly, on the Go, the button span is a little bit further apart due to being slightly wider. Looking at the back of the two, you can see that the grips are quite a bit larger on the Legion Go, which is something that's definitely needed for being such a large device. Having larger grips on the Legion Go is not really surprising. It's quite a large device and it makes it quite a bit more comfortable to hold. Next up, we have the Steam Deck OLED, which is a little bit wider than the Claw, but it's also not quite as tall. The button span's a little bit wider. It's also a different layout because of the trackpads. And if we take a look at the back here, you can see that it's a little bit thinner in the middle. And the rear grips are roughly the same size, maybe slightly larger. And then taking a look at the claw, it's a little bit thicker in the middle, and the grips are roughly the same size, maybe a little bit smaller. The claw kind of feels like a mix of the ROG Ally with the Steam Deck. And lastly, we have the One X Fly, which is significantly smaller than the claw, but it also has the same 7-inch screen. And the One X Fly has a much smaller bezel at the top as well as the sides. The buttons are closer together, as well the joysticks are smaller, but it is very comfortable to use still. Now taking a look at the back of the device, you can see that the One X Fly is about the same width in the middle, but the grips they're different style, but they stick out roughly the same amount. The One X Fly has a very smooth, kind of rounded feel to it. And then if you take a look at the claw, they stick out about the same, but there's more of like a ledge, I guess, that you can grab your finger onto. Both of them seem comfortable. I think they can get away with the rounded on the One X Fly because it's a smaller device. Overall, as I mentioned before, it feels like a mix of the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck, and the Steam Deck in a good way, like the grips are comfortable to use. So while it's not necessarily my most comfortable handheld, it's definitely within the top 5. A lot of people say that the MSI Claw is basically just a black ROG Ally, so let's take a closer look to see if that's the case. Let's check what's the same and what's different. We've already taken a look and compared the size of the devices, but let's take a closer look at the controllers first. The joysticks on these two devices are fairly similar. I did find that the dust cover had a bit of a thicker stem, but roughly the same range of motion as the Ally. Looking at the D-pads, they do look fairly similar, except some etchings on the Ally where they aren't present on the Claw. But looks is about all that they have in common because they do feel quite a bit different. The Claw is much tighter. Looking at the face button font, you can see that they look very similar. The Ally is a little bit more squared and the Claw is slightly rounded. But unless you look closely, you wouldn't know the difference. Probably the biggest difference is the bumper. The bumper feels really good on the Ally. You could press it anywhere and it will get an input. Where on the Claw, you can't press it on the left side because that's where it rotates. And it also has a bit of a mushy feel. The triggers are a little bit more shallow than the Ally. And on full press, you can hear the plastic tapping the back shell. Where on the Ally, there's a larger range of motion as well. They don't really bottom out, like you don't hear plastic hitting plastic. Now looking at the speakers, the Claw running along the bottom and the Ally has them running beside the screen. There's also the edge where the device starts to taper off on the front shell. They both have it, but it's in slightly different places. And the corners are slightly more angled on the Claw. The start and back buttons as well as the menu buttons look almost identical except they're literally flipped. So that certainly looks like a borrowed idea. And the screens and bezel look pretty well identical, so I'm pretty sure that they use the same screen in the device. Now we'll take a look at the back buttons as well as the venting. My device currently has a custom shell from Handheld DIY, but I will show you the stock one. First, comparing the venting here, you can see on the Claw, the whole back is pretty much a vent. So we're definitely not lacking there. Where on the Ally, they have the logo cutout and a little bit on the left. And while we're looking at the back here, you can see that the grips are significantly different between the two. There's a lot more to grip on the MSI than there is on the Ally. And now we'll take a look at the rear buttons. On the Claw, you can see that they're pretty much just horizontal, where on the Ally, they're actually slanted at an angle. Either of these designs work. I never really had trouble pressing either one. So now taking a look at them, it's not exactly a black ROG Ally, but they do have quite a bit of similarities, but they also have a few differences. So it's not completely a clone, but certainly draws inspiration from it. Now we'll take a look at the screen and the sound versus a few other devices. I did have to adjust the audio on the clip to match the rest of the video, but I did the exact same adjustment on every single clip, so there shouldn't be any kind of unfair advantage or disadvantage. One last thing, I'm using Dolby Access on the One X Fly, Legion Go, and ROG Ally. And as you could hear, the MSI Claw's speaker is very nice. It's probably the best speaker I have on any of my handhelds. And you can see that the screen is pretty nice too. It's not quite as vibrant as the Steam Deck OLED or the Legion Go, but it's definitely not bad. Now we'll move on to some game testing. So one thing to note is I had a number of crashes and it actually took a few times to record everything. As you can see here, Starfield crashed because I pressed the start button. All tests have been run with the 40-watt performance profile. We'll start things off with Cyberpunk. If you see stuttering, it's not your YouTube video.
Safe to take? You're absolutely sure? Need more time. He's got my back.
As you can see from these brief performance tests that the performance is not ideal right now. As you can see with this example here with God of War, I'm getting under 30 FPS half the time, which in this same exact environment, same settings, same boss fight, I get between 60 to 70 FPS on the Legion Go, the ROG Ally, as well as the One X Fly. The lower frame rate is one thing, but having all the stutters like we have in Cyberpunk 2077 just makes the game unplayable. Like, I grew up playing consoles, so 30 FPS I'm fine with if I need to play it at that, but when I can't really do anything because of all the stutters, it really makes it an unplayable experience. So with the same drivers, and yes, I am fully up to date, and the current device setup, I won't really mince words here. It's looking pretty rough. Like, it's definitely not competing with the other devices right now. And for certain titles, it's just simply unplayable. So hopefully this is something that they will be able to address with some driver updates, as well as maybe some system updates. But as it stands currently in my first impressions here, the device is certainly not living up to its price tag. So I think it needs a little bit more time yet. There's a lot more that I could go over today and possibly show you, but I'm going to keep it straightforward today, and we're going to come back to this in another video where I go a little bit more in depth into some of the issues. So to summarize my early impressions, let's go through what I like about the device and things that definitely need to improve. We'll start off first with what I like, and I really like the speakers on this device. They're definitely the best of any of the handhelds that I have. Previously, my One X Fly had the best speakers, but this one, it's about the same volume, but it has a more full sound, like a little bit more bass. So easily, that's something that I could say this device has an advantage over the others. The next thing I like would be the screen. Having VRR is always a nice option on a handheld. As well, the colors are pretty decent. The third thing that I like is, I would say, the ergonomics. It is comfortable to hold, and having more of a grip at the back is really nice. Like, I like being able to hold onto my handheld and not really feel like I'm going to drop it. And the next thing would be the joysticks. They're decent. I wouldn't say that they're the best in any handheld, but they're pretty good. And overall, I had a good experience with them. And now moving on to some things that could improve, I would say for sure the performance is its biggest hindrance. For being the newest device out, it's definitely not performing how you would hope. And right now, many games are really in an unplayable state. The next thing I would say is the bumpers. They feel kind of strange with the mushy, clicky feel. And also where you can only really press it closer to the outside is kind of annoying. I did take a look inside to see what's going on, and I'll show you in another video what exactly is happening there. Next would be the D-pad. Like, it's not terrible, but it's very tight and it doesn't feel very satisfying to use. I also wish that the device had a little bit more I/O, like a second USB-C port. And lastly would be the price. For the price of the handheld and the current performance, it's definitely not worth it. So either the performance needs to improve significantly or the price needs to drop dramatically. So overall, my impression of the device is I would say that if you're in the market for a handheld, maybe hold off on this one. There are plenty of other alternatives like the ROG Ally, the Legion Go, and a number of other handhelds that are probably a better option, and you can also get them cheaper. I'm usually a pretty positive guy, so for me to have more negative things to say than positive really says that this device is just really in a bad state right now. And I'm certainly not somebody that is wishing for any device to fail. I really hope that this one gets fixed, and those, myself included, get our value worth out of this device. But time will tell to see if the drivers improve and maybe if they do some system tweaks to make this run a little bit better. So my recommendation is to hold off until later and watch it closely to see if we get some gains in the future. And that's going to wrap it up for my early look review, so I hope that you enjoyed this video and thank you for watching.